Good afternoon, fellow ruminators. Welcome back to another session, Rumination with Andrew. Thank you so much for joining as we are about to discuss a very important topical matter. And this afternoon, we are going to look at why the Jamaican ruling class, that's the Jamaican oligarchy, is displaying their hypocrisy by asking Joe Biden to pardon Marcus Garvey, Jamaica's national hero, or one of Jamaica's national heroes. Now, Marcus Garvey is a very important and world-renowned Black scholar and Black activist and leader. He championed the causes of Black people all around the world, people of African descent, and I prefer that terminology, people of African descent, because on the continent of Africa, you have people of all hues, right? All skin colors. So he championed the cause of people or peoples of African descent. Now, Marcus Garvey was born in Jamaica, and he saw and witnessed the exploitation of people who look like him. And Marcus Garvey gave the experience in which he was in St. Anne, the parish in which he was born in St. Anne, Spain, and he used to play with this teenaged white girl that was there, but who belonged to the planter class, obviously. And this would have been after slavery, because for those of you who are not aware, slavery in the Anglo-Caribbean was abolished in 1834. And Marcus Garvey would have been born in 1887. So the fact is that he was close to that experience, and I'm sure that he would have met former slaves who perhaps would have spoken to him and would have given him some amount of knowledge about the brutal system of slavery that existed in Jamaica. In fact, the Jamaican scholar, that is Orlando Patterson, he suggests that slavery was the most brutal in Jamaica, the British had the most brutal form of slavery in Jamaica. That's what he suggested. And he perhaps is correct, because his main argument is that the British in Jamaica, when they took slaves to Jamaica from Africa, wouldn't take care of the slave. They treated the slave, as much what they said. They treated him as an object. And as soon as his life was exhausted and they had overworked him to death, then they would just go for fresh batches of slaves from Africa. So they did not invest in their slaves. In the United States, however, they bred slaves, or they bred descendants from slaves. So while this system was brutal, but they wanted them to live as long as possible so that they could work. In Jamaica, they were not concerned about the amount of years, number of years that the slaves lived for, because they just thought that they could just go back and replenish them, right, with a fresh batch of new slaves, right? So that is how they thought that then. Now, Marcus Garvey went to the United States because, he wanted to speak to the Black leader that was, I'm forgetting his name now, Booker T. Washington, right, who was living in the Reconstruction world, and he believed in the whole matter of, having Blacks become industrialized and becoming, having some sort of skill, right, that they didn't have to be necessarily educated, but it's important for them to have a skill that was needed. And I think that Marcus Garvey saw his viewpoints and his vision as something that, attracted him and something that could be applied in Jamaica. So he just went to the United States, hoping that he would have seen him and they could have sat down and they could have a dialogue. However, that was not to be, because Booker T. Washington died by the time he got to the United States. And Marcus Garvey decided to, just travel around the United States, and he saw an opening for him. He realized how depressed the black struggles were in the United States. So he decided that he would stay there and he would build a movement in the United States. Now, we understand that most of his followers, people are finding out now that most of his followers, Marcus Garvey's followers in the United States, were people of Caribbean and Latin American descent. Or those who were actually coming from the Caribbean, who had immigrated from the Caribbean and Latin America, from countries like Trinidad, Barbados, Jamaica, and all over the Caribbean, and they would follow him because, you know, his message was so strident, and he was a courageous Black leader. He was known also as the Black Moses, right? Let my people go. And Marcus Garvey was championing the cause of people or peoples of African descent. And he really wanted them to be free, not only to be free socially, but to be free economically. And that is why he preached self-help, the whole doctrine of self-help, and that we should grow what we eat, and we should have our own industries. We should have our own academic centers and not depend on people of European descent to feed us and to educate us and to take care of us, right? That was Marcus Garvey's sort of philosophy, and something that is needed now. Now, I find that the Jamaican ruling class, that they are hypocritical because they're there and they're talking about crime and violence and how the country is in a quagmire. In fact, when we look at Jamaica right now, we understand that the year has not even begun that well. We are just 16 days or 17 days rather into the new year, and we have over 34 murders that have been recorded in Jamaica. Over 34 murders have been recorded in 17 days in that country of Marcus Garvey. So, but we tend to fool ourselves, many Jamaicans, because they do not understand that you have two Jamaicas. You have the Jamaica of the elites and the Jamaica of the ordinary man, right? And that these two Jamaicas do not align, do not cohere, and that they do not have the same agenda. Now, when we find ourselves at prayer breakfast, we're praying and we're asking God for divine intervention, we must understand that God is not mocked by us, you know. We are the one who are mocking ourselves. We're deriding ourselves because God can read the heart. And I say this to say that we do not need the United States to forgive Marcus Garvey, because Marcus Garvey was a disciplined man. He was a man of, you know, impeccable integrity. And we know, those of us who have studied the history know that the United States treated him badly. And because they saw him as a threat to the status quo, and the fact that he was preaching Black liberalism, Black liberation rather, and wanted Blacks to be independent of white America. But you know, if Blacks become independent of white America, if they had become independent of white America, then who would do the job? Who would, you know, be able to be the victim of everything that is bad in the United States, for the United States to blame? Because the United States blame Black people for everything, right? So the United States and the ruling class there knew that they could not afford for Black people to be liberated, to be completely liberated, just to have a symbolic form of liberation is what they thought that was sufficient for them, and not for them to be economically independent and to be able to have their own hospitals and education centers and everything. They would not want that. But the Jamaican elites, they fool themselves and they control the narratives in Jamaica, that all is well for Jamaica. The fact that we have been to the IMF, and Marcus Garvey, not Michael Manley, but Marcus Garvey would have been against the IMF because he understood, or he would have understood, that the IMF and the World Bank and the CDBCs and most, if not all, of these multilateral institutions are just wings of US imperialism. And it is very, very hard to digest when I hear people saying Jamaica is better off because of our dealings with the IMF and the World Bank. Even though we received and the IMF imposed upon us the most austere IMF policy in the history of the IMF. But economically, Jamaica is better off, because it is good when we get our lashes, because we're still slaves, you know. Even those people who have been educated, you still think like a slave. Because if you think that we're better off, if you could even articulate that statement, something is wrong with your thinking. How can we be better off? How could we be better off? We can't be better off. We can't be better off. Because if we were better off, we would not be seeing the high murder rates that we're seeing there in Jamaica. gangsterisms, and gangs have taken over Jamaica. In fact, I was reading the papers yesterday, that's the Jamaican paper, and they're suggesting that in St. Mary, what was deemed to have been like a sleeping parish, where nothing much was really happening, right? People ate a lot of bananas and people were just living a quite decent life in St. Mary. But gangsterisms and the gangs have taken over St. Mary. And with gangs come what? Murders. So we're seeing now that even in St. Mary, in Westmoreland, and in all across rural Jamaica, including Clarendon and all these areas, there are hotspots of crime and violence. But we're better. We're better off than we were in 2012 because we're seeing some high-rise buildings, even though we don't even have access to our beaches. We're seeing all of these lovely hotels that are being built in Jamaica, luxurious hotels, yet we do not even have hospitals to which these tourists, if they get sick, they could visit and go to, right? We don't have those facilities. In fact, there was an American there who was complaining that he had fallen accidentally in his shower and had hit his face or head, whatever he hit, and blood was spewing, right? And it took some time for him to get some form of medical attention in Jamaica. Yet still we talk about the fact that we are in a better condition. We're in better shape than we were in 2012. I would not be surprised if we did not go back to 2002, right? Based on the IMF and the stringent policies that they imposed upon us, I am not surprised that we are not at the standard of living in 2002. And that is why we're seeing huge waves of migration to the north. Nobody wants to live in Jamaica. No decent-minded. A few of them are there, and I'm not going to say now that all Jamaicans there who decide to stay are not decent-minded, because that's not true. But most of the decent-minded people are leaving because they realize that they are in an environment in which at any given moment, their lives can be snuffed out. But not only that their lives can be snuffed out, but that the economics there is ridiculous. The cost of living is out of the roof, right? People can't afford basic food items because of inflation. And inflation is not just in recent times, I must say, but it was compounded under the IMF, because that is what the IMF does. It devalues your currency. And we were under the most restrictive IMF program in the history of the IMF. But Marcus Garvey should be pardoned, according to the Jamaican ruling class. Because if Biden should pardon Marcus Garvey tomorrow, then the ruling class can tell you that, yeah, it means therefore that we're doing something to help you, because Marcus Garvey is pardoned. Marcus Garvey would not be pleased if he were living in modern Jamaica. In fact, he would be speaking against anthroponists and mock coding. He would have highlighted the hypocrisy in these two leaders. He would have spoken against and spoken out against the IMF, the World Bank, and all of these multilateral institutions. He would have spoken up against the ubiquitous crime and violence that we have in Jamaica. He would have spoken up against the lawlessness that reigns supreme on that island. He would have, right? But you know, what is important for Jamaicans is symbolisms. So if we say tomorrow that Marcus Garvey has been forgiven by Joseph Robinette Biden, then we know that Joseph Biden was one of the best presidents that the US has ever seen. Even though under Joseph Biden's leadership as vice president under Barack Hussein Obama, Jamaica was literally invaded with the Christopher Doodle's situation that is there, right? That sort of controversy that was there, and they killed a lot of people there in Jamaica, and it was done in the 21st century. Wow. Now, here's what the Gleaner is saying, not merely a pardon. So the Gleaner, which represents the voice and organ of the Jamaican ruling elites are suggesting that Joseph Biden should pardon Marcus Garvey. We won't hold our breath, the Gleaner is saying. But if Joe Biden, at the 11th hour, musters the courage to do something about America's historic wrong against Marcus Garvey, it must not be merely a pardon. That is what the Gleaner is suggesting. The US Constitution does not give presidents the power of exoneration, but any pardon by Mr. Biden must include a fulsome acknowledgement that 100 years ago, Mr. Garvey, Jamaica's first national hero, was railroaded to jail in a cynical effort by the US to crush his Pan-Africanist movement and the rising Black nationalism in the United States. But they did the same thing in Jamaica, right? They didn't want any Black nationalism in Jamaica. They did not want the brown ruling elites in Jamaica were not in agreement with Marcus Garvey that the Black masses, the masses of descendants of former slaves, should be freed and should have economic independence and social equality. They did not agree with his social justice agenda. That is from a country that comprises predominantly people of African descent. Where over 95% of the people in Jamaica are people who look like the Garveys, who has the phenotypical appearance of Marcus Garvey, right? So the ruling elites there, the tiny white elites and the Arab and all of these elites there, the minority class, they want to give you this illusion that if Marcus Garvey should be exonerated tomorrow, then it shows us that the ruling elites mean Jamaicans well. Because them forgive you, them allow your national hero to be forgiven. Them have to forgive him. Right? They have to do it. And that is what you have in your mind. But Marcus Garvey does not have to be exonerated, because exonerated from what? He was innocent. So why does he need to be exonerated? The greatest and the most righteous man that ever walked on planet Earth, the God man, Christ himself, was also convicted and killed. But did it mean that he was a criminal? No. And I'm not suggesting that Marcus Garvey was Christ. But what they were suggesting that he committed was not true, was false. Right? So Marcus Garvey does not have to be exonerated or anything. Let them do what they want to do. Call me whatever you want to call me. If I know that you're wrong, it does not bother me. And that is the sort of character, that is the sort of personality that Marcus Garvey had. He was a leader and he had a backbone. He does not need Joseph Robinette Biden, who himself is a criminal, by the way. Right? These people were criminals. And they're now styling him as the genocidal president because of what he has done in the Gaza area. Right? So why would we want a person that is responsible for genocide in the world, in the Gaza area, among other places, right, to pardon Marcus Mosiah Garvey, to sully the image of Marcus Mosiah Garvey? Marcus Mosiah Garvey would not support Joseph Robinette Biden's administration. He would not have supported that administration. But listen to what the Gleaner here is saying. Listen to how biased they are there and how unintellectual people in Jamaica are. By ideology and instinct, everything that Marcus Garvey stood for is likely to be anathema to Mr. Trump. I repeat that. By ideology and instinct, everything that Marcus Garvey stood for is likely to be anathema to Mr. Trump. I would correct the Gleaner, the editor of the Gleaner, and I would suggest, I would have written thus: by ideology and instinct, everything that Marcus Garvey stood for is likely to be anathema to both Mr. Biden and Mr. Trump, because both of them represent US imperialism. So I am not sure what world the editor of the Gleaner lives in. And this is the sort of editorial that we write there. But, it's not just the Gleaner. It would have been the same thing expressed on CNN, and the New York Times and the Washington Post and all of these well-renowned newspapers, they would have written the same thing, that Trump represents a different America. Trump represents the America that all of us should be running away from. But Joseph Biden and the Barack Hussein Obama and the Hillary Clintons and and Bill Clinton himself, they all represent the softer side of America, an America that desires multilateralism around the world, that America should be working with its neighbors and collaborating. They should have a collaborative sort of approach to foreign policy, when the history does not suggest that. The history suggests that the United States, particularly after World War II, has had a unilateral approach under both Democratic and Republican presidents to its US foreign policy, and has bombed countries for not acceding to its requests and to its agenda. Right? But this is the world we live in. And when you go to college, this is the nonsense that people say to university, that the Democrats and the left-wing media, they are more intellectual and that they're telling you the truth. And the MAGA people, oh, the MAGA people, they're, wow, what a bunch of, idiots. What a bunch of idiots. Now, let me say something here. He would not have supported either parties, by the way. All right? I think I've made that very clear to you. So offensive to his concept of the universe and what ought to be the social order in the United States. So what should be the social order in the United States? Marcus Garvey would have agreed with the Democratic Party. That is what the newspaper is suggesting. This newspaper that you get up and read, and I'm sure it's expensive because everything in Jamaica is expensive. This newspaper, the Gleaner, that used to have some amount of respect in the Caribbean, is now like, I don't know. This paper does not, deserve to even be read. I'm just showing to you, I'm just highlighting to you what you are reading down and the garbage that you're filling your mind with down there. Nonetheless, this newspaper would not be surprised if the mercurial Mr. Trump, if asked, did what his predecessors, including himself, in his first stint did not do, grant the Garvey pardon. Now, why should Mr. Trump grant Marcus Garvey pardon? And I've already suggested, right? I've already intimated that Marcus Garvey does not need the pardon of any US president, particularly the ones who have been ruling since World War II, or even prior, but particularly those, because they are or were at the helm of US imperialism around the world, and the millions of people by now who would have died under US militarism and US imperialism. Right? So why should he? They're all war criminals. So are you suggesting that Marcus Garvey should have war criminals exonerate him from charges? Marcus Garvey stands superior to all of them combined. Marcus Garvey stands superior in terms of his intellect, in terms of his integrity, in terms of his humanity. He stands superior to all US presidents since World War II combined. Right? Not to mention his mobilism, his ability to mobilize people. The greatest Black leader of the 20th century. And we're asking a person like Joseph Robinette Biden to forgive him because we're slaves. And we think anything that comes out of the US Congress or America per se is something worth having. And that is the mentality that we have there. And it's not only in Jamaica, but around many of the people, in the world. Right? Now, this is an article that was written by I think I have to pull it up. I think I did not. Wow, how did I not have it here ready for you? But it was written by the Jacobins paper, The Rise and Fall of Marcus Garvey, right? The rise and fall of Marcus Garvey. And that article, while I'm pulling it up, was really talking about the fact that Marcus Garvey was not this radical, what you call it now, leader as we have been made to believe, right? He was not, right? The rise and fall of Marcus Garvey. Marcus Garvey rose to prominence. I'm reading from the Jacobin newspaper. It's a left-wing newspaper in the United States during a moment of deep pessimism for African American politics. His brand of radical uplift and Black entrepreneurialism accommodated itself to Jim Crow and colonialism, but fell out of favor as radical alternatives emerged. Now, despite the patina of militancy and radicalism, the Garvey movement represented a fundamentally conservative trend in Black political history. So Marcus Garvey is more of a conservative politician than a progressive, as we have our understanding of progressivism. Progressivism. He was more on the side of dressing well, not dressing like a communist, right? He believed in traditional family, right? He believed that a man is a man and a woman is a woman, right? He believed in speaking well. Marcus Garvey mastered the English language, right? And that is why he was able to speak and defend himself, and people felt that he was a threat because the man could speak, he could chat, and put chat to them and let them know that he was not at their level, right? So Marcus Garvey was not this person that we think is this radical thing where would carry himself anyway and have his, his Rasta hair. And in fact, he was against the Rasta movement in Jamaica. And the smoking and, dressing in this sort of rebellious nature. He was against that sort of lifestyle. Right? Is we are the ones in recent times, like the Rastafarians and, and all of this pseudo-intellectual or left-wing intellectualism. They have co-opted him, and they have redressed Marcus Mosiah Garvey into this garb that is false, having created this illusion that this man wanted a revolution. Marcus Garvey didn't want any revolution. He knew that revolutions are dangerous. He wanted more a revolution of the mind, right? That you would educate yourselves, you would read your history, and you would emancipate yourselves from mental slavery. Emancipate yourselves from mental slavery, right? None other but you can free your mind, right? Joseph Biden can't free it. The pastor of the church cannot free it for you. You've got to read for yourselves. You've got to free your own minds. And many of you are not willing to do so, right? So Marcus Garvey was a conservative person, right? At its core, the project combined two regressive tendencies in late 19th and early 20th century Black politics. The first was an abandonment of the more radical aims of Reconstruction in favor of a politics of self-help, racial uplift, and entrepreneurialism. The second was an embrace of PanAfricanism, made possible by the coincidence of the end of slavery in the United States and the ratcheting up of colonialism in Africa. This allowed aspiring members of the Black bourgeoisie to conceive of themselves as spearheading the West's civilizing mission, right? So most of these Black people that you see, who you think are important, like the Barack Hussein Obamas and the people working on Wall Street and so forth, are just, working for the class to sort of exploit their own people, right? The Colin Powells, the late Colin Powell, all these people, all they were doing was working for the US military-industrial complex, right? To exploit you and people around the world. That is their agenda. That was not Marcus Garvey's agenda. Marcus Garvey's fault in the eyes of the United States was that, one, he was a feisty person. He did not just take nonsense. He was a no-nonsense man. Another thing, he was an ethical man. He stood for what was right, though the heavens fall. And we need men like these, because men like these we have lost, right? Number three, he was, Americans like to, describe people, particularly Black people, when you are speaking the truth, and now that disease is spreading abroad, that you are crazy, right? That you are mad, that you don't have peace because you are standing up to a system. And when you stand up to a system, they have the media at their access to paint pictures of you as a mad person. And I'm sure that in Marcus Garvey's time, that he would have been described as a madman, because he was not simply following the status quo. He spoke out against injustices, racial, social, and economic injustices that were happening in his time, right? So how did we get here where we are suggesting that Marcus Garvey should be pardoned by the US Congress, right? A Congress that has agreed to and has signed off on laws to kill millions of people around the world. How did we get here? How did we arrive at this sort of thinking? This is something we have to ask ourselves. We've got to ask ourselves these very important questions. How did we get here? Because I think we have been brainwashed. I think that we have been misinformed. I think that we have been miseducated. And it's time for us now to educate ourselves. And many of what people are suggesting in our world today, right? Many of the things that you see in the world today are not true, right? Now, how do you get to know the truth? You have to sit and you have to be willing to want to know the truth. And many of us, if truth be told, do not want to know the truth. And that is why the Bible suggested that light has come into the world, and light there is a symbol of truth. But because men love darkness, they shun the truth for darkness. And in this time, in our era here, in 2025, as it were, the decade that we're living in, the 21st century, darkness is filling our land, and we've got to get back to what is truth. We've got to find the path of illumination so that our path can be illumined, right? Because if not, then we are going to be walking down, and we are already walking down, a path of destruction. Thank you so much for joining. I hope that you'd like, share, and subscribe to the channel so that the channel can grow and that we can send our truth to as many people as possible. See you in another one. Adios.